We got Brian Speronello on the podcast. Brian is the owner of Accelerated Conversions, a boutique, high-touch copywriting shop. Brian works closely with a few elite clients, and folks who are listening to this podcast are probably most familiar with Brian's work from the relaunch of MobilityWOD as the Ready State. So he was heavily involved in that campaign and actually getting all that information out there and making people excited about a new name and a new offering. So Brian breaks down some of the things that he worked on with the Ready State folks, as well as really digging into how to understand what people actually want, right? Anyone who has ever had a business or tried to sell people something has definitely had the experience of confusion and frustration with what people say they want versus what they actually want. So folks who are involved in copywriting often have a sixth sense for really understanding how to figure out what people are really going to buy and what they really, really want to do as opposed to what they say they want to do. So Brian has some really great insight on that. So check this one out, some in the weeds copywriting stuff, which I think is applicable, not just to people writing, long sales pages on the internet, but really anyone who is interested in persuading anybody of anything, which, I think there's some ambitious people listening to this podcast. So hopefully you guys get some value out of this one. Enjoy.
Before we started recording, you're talking about how you work with only a select group of clients at a time. And I think you mentioned that you had 6 clients all of last year, which is not very many. So how does that actually work? And why do you prefer to work in this very, small group of clients with whom you have a lot of communication and a very high touch model?
For me, it's never been my goal, at least to this point in my life, to build a team, to manage other people. I've been intentionally trying to keep a business model where I am the one doing all of the work. It's just very hard it requires a lot of different sort of mindset and infrastructure to start bringing on other people to replace you. I'm a huge believer in systems and processes, but I've used those to sort of take all of the non-copywriting, non-delivery of my service off the table. So I spend between, last year I averaged 85% of my time spent on client work, because that's where I'm getting paid. Every single hour that I spend doing something that is not a client project, that's an hour I'm not getting paid. And it's an hour that I have to sort of raise my rates a little bit more to compensate me for that unused time. So with that as my goal of not having a team, of being a solo professional, then by definition, it makes it very easy for me to have a small number of clients that I charge relatively high rates, and I can sort of break down the models that I have for each client in a second. But every new client you have to acquire comes with costs, time costs of onboarding, costs if you have a contract review, then I have to pay my lawyer to look at it. So every new client that comes on board, there's a good amount of time to get that first project. And then after that, it becomes, getting repeat business from that client becomes easier. So, it's sort of that marketing truism of, it's much easier to sell more to an existing customer than to acquire a new customer. So I've really designed my business around streamlining and minimizing the number of new customers that I need to get, and keeping a small roster of clients that are paying me on an ongoing basis that give me a very healthy, comfortable income. And then I don't have to continue, grinding out looking for clients every week, every month. I can just, so last year I had 3 clients that were on retainer. They paid me, between $3,500 and $4,500 a month. And then I had 4 other clients who all of them booked at least 2 projects with me, if not more. And they were all, again, a couple $1,000s a piece minimum. So, if you can do that math, I made a pretty comfortable income, and I was able to spend most of my time, 85%, doing the thing that I enjoy the most, which is writing copy and delivering, sales increases for those clients. And I didn't have to spend all my time chasing business and going out and pitching and going to networking events and handing out business cards and doing all that stuff. that kind of sucks. I can do the fun thing, which is work with clients, make money for me and make money for them.
Yeah, totally. So it sounds like it's not just a calculation of, oh, okay, if I'm, spending more time writing copy, then I'm actually making money, but it's also you sort of structured your business such that you're doing the thing that you like doing, right? That talking about fitness coaching, for example, a lot of people who own gyms are like, great, I love coaching. I love working out. I'm going to own a gym. This is going to be awesome. And I can speak from experience. If you own a gym that is doing well, guess what you don't get to do? Coach or work out. You get to send emails and have meetings.
Yeah. So exactly. It's a great point. And I don't know if a lot of the people in the fitness industry see the same thing that I see sort of in the copywriting and freelancer world, where there's just been this explosion of sort of shitty online courses that people are throwing together. And to me, I think it's a symptom of people putting the marketing cart before the horse, where everybody's sold this bill of goods of like, you need an email list and you need this and you need that. I don't have an email list. My website, I can count my monthly visitors on two hands because my business does not revolve around online marketing in that way. And I feel like those tools are great if your service scales, because email marketing, social media, all that stuff, that gives you a scalable marketing engine, which means you also should have a scalable product or service engine. There's this disconnect where people build this scalable marketing machine. They're investing all this time, all this money building an email list, and then they realize, again, if it were me, you work with 5 or 10 people of the hundreds, maybe thousands that you've invested in getting on your email list. All of a sudden, you're like, why am I putting all this time and effort into this online marketing when I'm only working with 5 or 10 of the people total that are on that list in a given year? Like it completely, it makes no sense, and they're totally not aligned. And if people haven't thought through, like, why, if they haven't decided on their business model first and then built the marketing to support the business, they've sort of chased this marketing dream. They wind up with all of these people on their email list that they're not making money from, and then they say, oh, I need to come up with a way to sell to them, even though they don't really care about it. They're not really invested in it. It's not really what they want to do. It's not part of their original plan. But since they've now got this email asset, they just throw a course together. It's terrible, but they've put themselves in that position because they haven't started with the business first and then built the marketing to support the business. They've they've got the shiny object syndrome of all these fun marketing things they can do, but the business model is not in alignment, and then they cause problems for themselves.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something interesting in there as well, just about the idea of having a scalable service, right? And like, yes, you could have a scalable copywriting service where you potentially have other copywriters working under you and you sort of mentor them and, edit their copy and give them bullet points that they need to hit in terms of how they design a sales page or whatever. But then when you're doing that, you yourself are not writing the copy, right? And it sounds like there's an element of, almost artistry and like pleasure in the craft that you get from actually doing copywriting that turning it into a scale business would not facilitate. You actually continuing to be, that artisan chipping away at the block of copy, trying to craft the perfect statue or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. I could probably eventually make more money if I built an agency and scaled an agency and got copywriters under me and did that whole thing. But that is hard work, and it's hard work that I'm really not interested in doing. So you could perhaps call me lazy and say that, I'm not willing to put in the effort or anything like that. But, it's a conscious decision on my part. It's not something that I'm sort of willfully ignorant of. It's something that I'm saying at least at this point in my life, I'm not interested in doing. Then, I could change my mind, in a year or two. I could say, now I am ready. I am interested in building a team, in learning more and working more on leadership and processes for the actual delivery of the work. But that's just not where I am right now. I'm more interested in writing as much copy as I can, enjoying that process as much as I can, and maximizing my business within those constraints. versus, I don't know. Have you heard the idea of like a local maxima versus like a global maxima, and it's like A/B testing or anything else?
Yeah, totally. Could you give a little explanation of that?
So basically, a local maxima is you take a given sales page or website or whatever, and you sort of make small changes to the text of the button or the button color or the headline copy or any number of small changes within that page to try to get that page to perform the best that it possibly can. Versus, so that would be the local maxima, means you take whatever is there and you make small changes to try to get that thing to the very peak of what it can be. Then the global maxima is taking 3 completely different layouts and designs and approaches for a page and testing those against each other. So, if you're in the fitness industry, let's say, a local maxima would be having a sales page on a weight loss product and tweaking all the little elements to get that page to be the best weight loss page that it can. Versus a global maxima would be testing one page that's about weight loss, one page that's about muscle gain, and one page that's about endurance and increasing your aerobic engine, right? So those 3 completely different ideas would give you a sense of which of those sort of topics and pain points are most important, versus once you've found the best one, then you dial in that one little thing. So for me, on my business, I'm trying to optimize the solo professional business model right now. And again, like I said, I'm keeping an open mind that maybe that changes in the future, but right now I'm not considering these sort of broader strokes changes to my business. I'm pretty darn happy. I'm pretty darn happy with where I am right now.
Yeah, I mean, for you, it sounds like, writing copy is almost like playing guitar, and you love it, and you love practicing it, and you're getting better at it. And it's like, oh, I love playing guitar. I'm going to have a guitar playing agency. Let me hire all these guys to play guitar for me. It's like, no. Like, the whole point is to play guitar.
Right. Exactly. Yes. The whole point of my business for me is to write copy. So yeah, that you got it.
Yeah, I love that. And like I said before, I think that a lot of coaches can get messed up on that, right? And, I know for me personally, I certainly had a point where I was like, oh God, I can't coach as much or barely at all because of my obligations to actually run a business. And I did actually find that to be challenging, but then I also simultaneously started to appreciate aspects of running a business that I didn't before. So like there was sort of like an overtime transition into that being okay, but that there's not recognizing that there's a trade-off, right? In terms of the actual practicing of the craft and the sort of like artistry of the craft, and understanding, that you potentially are going to sacrifice the overall quality of what's going to be presented to your clients if you're actually teaching other people to do the craft that you have developed, that you may or may not want to make those trade-offs, and that anyone deciding to make those trade-offs should probably do that with like full understanding of the decision that they're making.
Right. And from what we've talked about too, you've found elements of the gym ownership to that have sort of got you fired up. And yeah, I don't know if the listeners know about you built the whole, like the dashboard and all the metrics. And so, you've gotten to dive into some of those things that are interesting to you that as a coach, you don't really get to touch in terms of retention and, AOV, lifetime value, that type of stuff. So I think it's interesting to see that you had those interests. So you were able to sort of trade one set of interests for another. Whereas, like you said, a coach whose whole existence is about coaching clients, think about how do you keep, you don't have to try to find a way to scale that business. There are plenty of coaches who just coach and do really, really well, but they're intentional about that. I think that, to me, that's what the big global takeaway here is know what you're doing and why you're doing it, and then build the marketing and the copy and everything else around that, versus seeing all these other people and doing all these other things and sort of jumping out and trying to chase them again just because they're new or hot or exciting or you've heard a lot about it. So yeah, I would say try to experiment within the constraints of where you really see yourself and your business going.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned that you've worked with, small group of clients consistently, and they're paying you a decent amount of money to write words. Why would someone pay someone thousands of dollars per month to put words on a website? Seems like a waste of money.
Yeah, so fair point. I can see why it would I can see why some people might think that. So really it's about amplifying your sales at the end of the day. What the type of copy that I write specifically is focused on sales, conversions, opt-ins, some type of measurable business metric that moves the business closer to increased sales, increased revenue, increased profits. So by hiring me to rewrite your website, your email copy, you will get more of the people who come to your site or who read your emails to buy whatever you're selling. So my goal is always clients pay me a couple thousand, I make them a couple 100,000 over the course of a year, because that many more people will, again, buy whatever they're selling, sign up for their email list, which they then can sell them down the line. Any number of those things where it's directly tied to their business goals, their growth, their profits.
Yeah, and what about words on a page can actually have that much change, or can impact that much change in terms of people buying something?
The biggest thing in terms of impact on a given page would be the headline. I think David Ogilvy said something like, once somebody's read your headline, you've spent 70 cents of your dollar or whatever. So, 70 to 80% of the impact is the headline, subject line if it's an email, or, the first, and that trickles down. So probably the first several sentences of whatever you're writing are the most important by far. Because if that sucks, nobody's going to keep reading whatever you have. So, the first several things, starting with the headline, are the most important. I've heard other marketers who've talked about 5, 10 times, maybe not 10 times, that might be excessive. I've heard credible stories of like 4 to 5 times increase in conversions, increase in sales, just from changing a headline, not changing another letter on the page besides the headline. One example that I know, you're familiar with Jay Abraham, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
So I don't know. So for the listeners,
yeah, can you give a quick background?
He's kind of a legend in the direct marketing space. He's been responsible for helping his clients generate over $10 billion with a B dollars of incremental sales. And he's been doing it for like 40 something years. He's a living legend. So he talks about how he took a headline back when there was like it was legal to invest in gold again. And some company was running an ad in the Wall Street Journal, and it was profitable. And it was like 2/3 bank financing on gold was the headline. And Jay Abraham realized that, that doesn't really explain what this does for the reader. So he just changed the headline to say, if gold is trading at $300 an ounce, send us $100 and we'll buy you as much gold as you want. So basically 2/3 bank financing means if you send us $100, we'll put up the other $200. So just that one change of, send us $100, we'll buy you all the gold you want, took that from wherever it was to like 3 or 4 times sales. The rest of the thing stayed entirely the same. So those types of changes can have huge impacts. And the only way to get there, though, is you have to try a bunch of them. And that's why testing different ideas, going back to that idea of local maxima versus global maxima, when you're trying to optimize a given page, the headline is one of the first places you want to start because, again, that's where you've spent 70 to 80 cents of your marketing dollar. If you get that right, more people read the next thing. And if that's good, then they're kind of sucked in and they're committed, and you get a lot more people getting to the call to action to the sales part later.
So it sounds like, based upon what you're saying, the headline is the most important thing. And so in terms of getting people's attention, what are we doing? Are we just creating like clickbait headlines, like one weird trick to whatever, and 7 reasons you're a '90s kid? Is this what we're trying to do here?
Yes and no. Those, there are things you can learn from them. The issue I take with those headlines is if they don't actually deliver on the promise in the headline, right? So if the article or the content or whatever doesn't actually fulfill the promise you make in the headline, and it's just there for attention's sake to get a click, and then it's garbage, yeah, that I have an ethical problem with that. But that doesn't mean you can't learn from the techniques that are in those headlines, like getting people's attention, getting people curious, getting people to click. Those are all good skills to have. Then it's a matter of what are you using those skills for, and is it for something that is ultimately a benefit to your reader, or something that where you're sort of extracting value from them and it's a one-sided exchange. So when it comes to headlines, you obviously want to have something that is driving curiosity or making a promise, a reason for the, like, why does the reader need to keep reading after they see the headline is the first piece. You need to give them a reason to continue reading whatever you've written. So again, that could be curiosity. It could be a big promise. It could be any number of things that gets them hooked and want to read the next line. The other piece is elements of proof or credibility, or a reason to make them believe that what you're saying is true, right? You could make a huge promise, lose 30 pounds in 30 days. But if there's no proof, if there's nothing to make that statement credible, then all of a sudden it's an empty promise, and people are going to be skeptical that, I've heard this weight loss promise a zillion times. Like, why am I going to believe whatever you're telling me is true? Versus, if you say, the new method Kathy used to lose 30 pounds in 30 days, that's, taking, Chicago moms by storm or something. Now there's a lot more specificity, and it's not making a claim that, everybody can do this, but it's saying, hey, this person had these results and here's how. And if you want to get the same thing, then you're going to keep reading to see, oh, how did this person do it? I'm interested in it. And then you can then continue to fulfill on that promise. And again, what you're selling better deliver on that. It better be truthful that Kathy lost 30 pounds in 30 days or whatever you're going to say. That's got to be true. Otherwise, you're a scam artist, and, they should shut down your account.
Freeze this man's PayPal.
Yeah,
freeze
exactly,
his funds.
Shut down the merchant accounts. Call the FTC. Yeah, it's and sadly, you're right that stuff does happen, and in some ways, it gives the rest of us a bad name for developing a skill that can help real businesses delivering real value to their clients and their customers. So, I personally sort of take that as part of, my ethical stance. And that's something that I can sell to my clients, is that I don't and will not cross those lines. And if you're looking for somebody who does that kind of thing, then no, I'm sorry. I just won't work with you.
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the things that you're sort of mentioning, but I don't know if you stated it explicitly, is just really understanding what the actual benefit is to the individual who's potentially reading an ad, right? That it's not enough to just get their attention with a tricky headline, but it also has to be something that they are legitimately interested in and that they want, right? So that Jay Abraham example is fantastic, of okay, here's some sort of opaque terminology, that obfuscates what's actually going on with this purchasing of gold. And if we just frame it to you in a way that makes sense, you're like, oh yeah, I want to buy gold. This is a thing I'm interested in doing. You've laid out how I can do it. Sign me up, take my money. How do I do it? So how do you figure out what people are actually looking for that they are willing to purchase?
it's hard work. So, and as someone who has done a lot of, marketing and who has a number of different businesses like you do, I'm sure this is something you've gone through. So I'd love to hear your process as well. For me, when it comes to an initial test, if you're trying to figure out what is someone interested in and like, is this really a problem that they have? Figure out what the smallest possible thing that you can actually sell them is, and then go out and make a sale. Because if you can actually get someone to buy, if you're thinking that people want, training to increase their aerobic capacity, right? If that's your hypothesis that, aerobic engine is the new thing in the CrossFit world, and I'm going to be able to get a ton of clients selling them on aerobic efficiency. Okay, great hypothesis. What's the smallest thing that you can sell that will get people, that will actually prove that hypothesis, because you're going to get paid? Because everything else that's not getting paid it can potentially be a false positive. If people say, oh yeah, that's, if you tell your friends and family or whatever that you're going to start a business, chances are they're going to say, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And, everybody's going to be positive and platitudes and all that. But if you ask them to pull out their credit card, all of a sudden you might get a very, very different story. So for me, whenever you're trying to test an idea, if you can get paid for a minimum viable product, a very, very sort of small, broken down sort of nugget of what you're planning to sell in the future, and you can actually get a couple sales, it's a great sign you're on the right track. Versus, again, if you're anything else where you're not collecting a payment, there's the potential risk of a false positive where people are going to say it's a great idea, and then you spend 6 months of your life building this thing, and then come back and say, hey, I built the thing that you said was great. Will you pay for it? And they say, oh no, sorry, like you just wasted a half a year.
Yeah, I'm really busy at work actually right now. It's not a great time.
I mean, you've heard that, right? Have you gone through that type of testing and ever either had that problem and or avoided it because you've done that sort of core MVP type scenario?
Yeah, sort of. So I think that fitness is an interesting area because, like you mentioned earlier, it's an area where people are kind of guarded, probably more so than some other industries, right? Because there are so many like fake claims and overblown claims and things like that. So people are a little more skeptical, I think, in fitness than they are in some other areas. And based upon that, it can be a little bit complicated to figure out what people are actually looking for and what they actually want. And I will say that in terms of, people saying that they want something and then not actually buying it, we've certainly had that with a lot of different programming stuff through Legion. So something that people say that they want is people are very interested in like accessory work and like additional stuff they can do where they're like, yeah, I'd really love like an accessory program. And, I'd love for something that I can do for like 30, 45 minutes a day in addition to like a normal CrossFit class workout. Sounds super interesting to me. I'd love to buy it. And then they don't. Right. So that's an example where what people say and what they actually do is like completely misaligned. And I think there's a few things going on there. I think one of them is that people have like a very aspirational idea of their own training where, they do this at the gym too, where they're like, yeah, we need a yoga class. I'm like, we had it. You didn't come. And they're like, yeah, but we should definitely have a yoga class. They're like, you're not coming to yoga. Like, I know you're not coming, right? But they have this idea of them liking to do yoga. But when it's like, are you going to literally come to yoga class? The answer is no.
Right. Are you getting up at 6 a.m.?
Program is similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you getting up at 6 a.m. to come to this yoga class when you say you want it and your alarm goes off at 5:30 and you hit snooze and I think we're both sort of saying the same thing of what people say they want and what people actually will buy can be very divergent at times. So before you go and invest a ton of time and resources, do something small, get someone to pay. And if they do, then build out the next biggest, increase the scale by 50% or whatever, and then sell it again at that level and work your way up slowly. The idea of emerging fully formed is largely a myth. I think, there's that story of, the 10-year overnight success where they've built this thing for 10 years and then all of a sudden it hits that inflection point and takes off. And everybody thinks it was overnight, but really they were building it slow and steady for a long, long time before it finally hit that inflection point.
Yeah, for sure. They were probably trying a bunch of different stuff and getting frustrated and learning. And then, when someone finally is like, oh, like, check this thing out, it's like all of a sudden huge.
Yep. Yeah.
So in addition to figuring out what people actually are interested in, right? Like testing different products and being like, are you going to literally pay for this or not? I think something else that is really interesting about the idea of copywriting is when you do have something that is kind of working, understanding not just what people are buying, but also the sort of, I think the terminology of like unique selling proposition might not quite be what I'm talking about, but something like that, where there's insightful aspects of a product that the product creators don't necessarily recognize that can just be, rocket fuel in terms of having an item take off in a market that's already kind of interested in it. Have you seen anything like that in your own copywriting?
Yes. So I think you're talking about the whole Schlitz beer thing from back in the day.
That's a good example. Yes.
So would you mind breaking that down?
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly the details of the story, but I'll do my best on it. Right. But so Schlitz beer, was this actually Jay Abraham who they hired for this?
I don't think it was, but I'm pretty sure it's in one of those like sort of old school direct response sales books and copy books. Totally. So that's why we both know what we're referring to.
Yeah, and but I feel like I may have read Jay Abraham talking about it or heard him talking about it. But the gist of the story is essentially that Schlitz Beer hired someone to come in and do their marketing and write some copy for their advertisements. And this individual is trying to figure out, okay, well, what's actually unique about Schlitz Beer? What can we talk about? What can we explain to the consumer that's going to make them excited to purchase this beer over all others? And they come into the factory, they're taking the tour, they're going through all this different stuff. And then they actually look at the process that the beer goes through in order to get made, right? Where it's taken through this very complicated process. The water is distilled repeatedly. They select certain grains of yeast and all this stuff happens that, really makes this process very, very complicated. And it seems, almost extreme just to make a can of beer. And the copywriter is like, whoa, like, so you guys do all this stuff? You do this to the water, you do this to the yeast, you do this in the bottling process. And the plant manager is like, yeah, everyone does. And the copywriter is like, well, no one knows that. And this is awesome. So we're going to make this the entire point of the advertising campaign is that here's the process that this can of beer went through in order to show up to you. Isn't this incredible? And that this turned out to be a fantastic angle to take, that people were very impressed by the purity and the complexity of the process. And that just seemed like, a normal day's work to everyone who actually worked in the beer plant. But to a consumer, it's like, holy cow, I love it. Give me another barkeep, another Schlitz, please.
Yes. Yeah. They and you're right. Like that the guy went in and did all that analysis. And I think he actually narrowed it down to like one key process was steaming the bottles to like kill the bacteria beforehand. So that was sort of the hook that got into the whole rest of the ad about the process, the quality control, to the sort of the general gist of the ad from a high level was like, this is the most high quality, pure, best tasting beer because of all the stuff that we do to make it, right? So that was the overall message they were trying to send. But I think that he dialed in specifically on like steaming the bottles to kill bacteria and how that means like, there's going to be no risk of health complications and no bacteria. It's going to be, pure and refreshing. And every bottling company would steam their bottles to disinfect them. But he was the first person to say, wow, nobody's telling this story, and it inspires trust and it inspires credibility, and it makes people believe that, that they're quote unquote safe drinking this beer because of the high standards, the high quality control versus, Joe Schmo down the block who's like mixing it in some barrel in his barn next to his animals who might be like drinking out of the beer half the time, and would you want to be getting the donkey's backwash when you're drinking your beer, or would you rather be drinking this thing from Schlitz that's gone through, Six Sigma of process and quality control? So
counterpoint, Well, I bet there's a craft beer out there called Donkey's Backwash.
There might be, maybe it adds the flavor. I don't know, but let's say it's not for most people. So yeah, I think, I don't know if this example is actually in the book that I'm about to talk about, but in a book called How to Write a Good Advertisement, which you can find on Amazon, it's a great book. It goes through 17 different ways of establishing proof, and proof and credibility, going back to the headline discussion we had, it's critical. It is, in the top 2 or 3 things in my day-to-day as a copywriter that I'm constantly focused on is, I'd say it's probably number 2. Number 1 is, what's the benefit? What's the reader going to get out of this? And then number 2 is, how do I convince him that I'm not lying, that this is legit, that this is true, that they should believe me? And all of those things are proof. So how do I, and it's sort of like a seesaw, right? You make a claim, this is what it's going to do for you. Then you need to establish proof. Here's why you can trust me. Here's why what I just said is believable. And then you go on to the next thing of proof. So this book, How to Write a Good Advertisement by Victor Schwab, goes through 17 different types of proof. Some of them, so I don't have them all memorized, but I do have I have them written out in a Google Doc that I will either send to clients or walk through with clients and interview them to document all of these things. Because some of them, again, they're so close to the business. This is what everybody does. But to the customer, they have no idea, right? They're not in the factory with you. They have no idea. So things like the construction and the durability of the container, right? If you're selling a physical product, let's say you're shipping something across the country that's perhaps fragile. If you're like, I don't know, if you're selling like beer glasses, right? You're selling these really high-end, really nice artisan set of beer glasses. Well, if somebody's buying that from you, they're going to be worried, what if they break in transit? So you then need to say, we have this super durable shipping container that's packed in this, that's protected by that, and we have this guarantee return policy where if anything arrives broken, not only do you get to keep the ones that aren't broken, we'll send you a whole new set for free, right? Something like that. So you have to understand what potential concerns are and then use these elements of proof to overcome those concerns. Some of the other examples are, there's a number of them related to other people. So you would call this, in some respects, an umbrella of social proof, but that can be, so a lot of people hear social proof, they immediately think about testimonials, right? Which I'm sure you've talked about before, you've used. That's where you have someone who your customer identifies with as like them, right? So if you're doing personal training for new moms who are in their, over 30, right? So you got this custom home workout plan for new moms who are over 30. Well, if you're going to be doing testimonials and social proof, you're going to want to be showing other new moms who are over 30. So that way your reader sees themselves in the testimonial. That's one type of social proof. But there's also what I would call expert proof, which is where, someone who has some type of authority or credibility, like a doctor, right? If a doctor said, I give this programming to all of my patients after they give birth, that's a different type of social proof because it comes from a credible expert as opposed to someone who is a peer of your audience. And then the third type, which is actually, I think, the most underutilized and most interesting, is something that I would call like the discerning customer, where it's not necessarily someone who is identical to your target market, but it's someone who would have the highest standards for whatever you're selling. So like, let's say these are the shoe insoles that nurses use on their 14-hour shifts, or these are the shoe inserts that the construction guys use on the job site when they're on their feet for 12 hours a day. If they can work for them, then they can work for you. So that one is probably the least used and the least popular. But if you can think of, if you have sort of a dominant position in a certain market where they're putting your product or service through the highest sort of standards and thresholds, and you're working and you work for that group, you can take that and you can sell to anybody. This is actually, so it connects to an idea in another book. I think it was Made to Stick, where they talk about the Frank Sinatra test, where it's if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. So let's say you're hiring a security company, right? One company's been in business for 10 years. Another's been in business for 10 weeks. Chances are you're probably going to start by leaning towards the company with 10 years of experience. But then you find out, oh, that company that's 10 weeks old, for the last 9 weeks, they've been doing the security at the White House. They've been completely redoing the entire security system for the White House. Now who are you going to pick? The company with 10 years of experience or the company who did the security for the White House, even though that was their only job in the history of the company? If you can make it at that level, you can make it anywhere, right? If you're doing security for the White House, or if you're coaching Olympic athletes, you can scale that down to anybody. So thinking about that of where do you have a discerning group, and then using that to say if we are good enough for them, we are certainly going to be good enough for you.
I think it's a really interesting insight, and I don't know if I've ever totally labeled that with like a clear label like that, but I was thinking about that with ZipRecruiter actually does a really good job with that. So anyone who's listening to this podcast has probably listened to plenty of podcasts sponsored by ZipRecruiter, but they'll have something that's like, whoever used ZipRecruiter and they found someone to, be in charge of their oil rig out in the middle of the Pacific. And it's like, oh, interesting. The number of people looking for someone out to man an oil rig is, very low, but that's a very discerning group with a very specific niche interest. And it's like, you probably have some weird job you're trying to hire for. Well, guess what? Here, we found all these weird jobs. So use ZipRecruiter.
Also, ZipRecruiter, if you hear this, make sure you sponsor this podcast too.
Yeah.
Todd could use a couple extra rowers at the gym.
Yep. Love it. Sign me up.
So, I would say, I don't know if there's someone else has a different word for it, but to me, like that idea of whether you call it the Frank Sinatra test or like the discerning customer, understanding that some of your customers are going to be like, they're going to be not just peers of your other customers, but sort of at a higher level or at an aspirational level where you can say, if we've been able to make this massive transformation for this one client, then imagine what we can do for you.
So how do you balance that with not intimidating people? So, I mean, to give a specific example, right? If we at the gym at South Loop Strength and Conditioning lean too heavily on competitors, that's actually not good for us, right? A competitor in CrossFit would be someone that is like a discerning customer, but that's actually negative because people then become scared to come to the gym because they think they're not good enough, right? If we're like, oh, we coached this CrossFit Games athlete here, this CrossFit Games athlete there, this person who can do all these muscle ups, this person who can snatch all this weight, people are like, that's scary, I'm going somewhere else. And, I don't think every example is like that, but I imagine there's probably other areas where you can intimidate people by focusing too much on like experts and discerning groups.
Oh, absolutely. And it becomes less believable too. I think the key for me is where did they start, right? The key is in all this stuff is where did they start? So if you could say, we took, Jane off the street who, had never done a muscle up in her life, and now she's like competing in the open or whatever, all of a sudden it's not about and you would then say, we've taken this average person to these extraordinary places, which means we can take you, average person, however far you want to go. Maybe you don't want to be competing in the games. Maybe you just want to be able to do a couple pull-ups. We've taken someone like you to the very heights of success, which means we know how to take you from where you are to wherever you want to go. Again, whether that's a couple pull-ups or competing in the games, like we can make that transformation happen no matter what. But the key for me is you're right. If you just say, here's all these crazy CrossFit Games athletes that work out at our gym, you're going to scare people that, oh, I'm not at that level. I can't, like, that's not for me. Versus we've taken people who started where you are. That's the focus. It's these people were all just like you. Now they are at these crazy places. And this goes into understanding your customer a little bit. But if you can understand where they want to go, right? Again, let's take the pull-up example. Let's say that this person just, wants to be able to do their first pull-up. If you can say, we've taken, here's these customers who came into the gym, couldn't do a pull-up. Now, this person is doing 5, this person's doing 10, this person's doing 6, but we've all progressed them from nothing to those points. So if you only want one pull-up, well, guess what? We've gotten these people to so much further than that. Then, we're certainly going to be able to help you get to your one pull-up. That's your goal. And again, I understand that that perhaps may not be the most aspirational example, but it was easy to quantify, and I'm doing this off the top of my head.
Yeah, totally. Well, but I think that is insightful, right? That especially in an area like fitness, like that, where people are intimidated, it has to be balanced. And I can imagine other areas where someone might think, to even go back to your security example, if someone's like, oh, they do security for the White House, like I don't need that. Right. Or if it's like a software company, it's like, ooh, this is like an enterprise software company that is doing some sort of back end thing for Facebook. Like, I mean, I'm just trying to host a website. I don't know if I really need all that stuff, so right. It's figuring out who you actually want to serve and finding that balance.
That's a great point. So you're right that the security example, if you were doing security for the White House, it would absolutely establish your credibility, but you would also probably be sending the message that you're expensive as hell, because that is not something you're doing on the cheap. So by highlighting that, you have the utmost in credibility, but you're also sending other messages like what it's going to cost to work with you. So you want to be smart about that. And so like you said, if you had a bunch of CrossFit competitors working out at your gym, but your main goal is really to get like the average, workout, morning and evening workout crowds in the gym, then even though you have those high-end athletes at your disposal to talk about, you might not, just because it would actually be counterproductive. So, for example, if you were trying to just be sort of an average, sort of medium-level security company, not charging astronomical rates, going for businesses that have a more modest budget, and you happen to get that White House contract, you might not bring it up because you know that it would actually scare away your target customers, because they would think that you are way out of their price range before they even looked at you. So being aware of those additional implications of your message is important. And I think back to the other point of customer research, it's and going out and actually sort of testing what you're trying to sell by starting small and getting people to pay. You can follow up with the people who don't pay to understand why they didn't buy. And perhaps you'll find something like that where, oh, you said it was this, and I thought that was going to be too hard for me or too expensive for me or whatever. And then you realize, oh, I'm not doing the best job communicating my offer to them because they misunderstood. I used this example and it made them believe that I could do what I was promising, but it also made them believe that I was way too expensive, so they just didn't give me the time of day. So having that type of close contact with your customers, with your audience, is invaluable. And I'm sure you see it at the gym, right? I know you have pretty tight turnaround times in terms of your email, and you're constantly communicating with your members. So I'm assuming that you hear, if there's a problem, you're going to hear about it real fast and you're going to do something.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because I do think that some problems, yes, other problems, no, right? And that's sort of like a different scenario of like, okay, how do you create an environment where people feel comfortable giving feedback? And also, how do you make people recognize what is and isn't important? Like that's a totally different conversation, which can be tough. And I think it's related to what we were talking about earlier, and just in terms of people really knowing what they want or don't want, that there's probably something similar there, where people are kind of strange about what they'll bring up or what they'll complain about. And they'll just like tolerate something else that's completely unacceptable, but they haven't really put their finger on it as like, oh, this is actually annoying me and I should do something about it. So that's another tricky thing, is like, how do you actually elicit feedback from people that is in fact relevant to what they, are going to pay for or not?
Right. Well, I guess credit to you at least that you understand that that this is hard, that your business depends in many ways on getting that feedback, and that you're doing everything you can to get it, even though sometimes it may be like pulling teeth because people don't want to talk about it. They're embarrassed to talk about it. it hasn't even registered. Like it's gone on for so long, or it was that way when they got there. Any number of these things cause people to not speak up. And so your job as the business owner, again, whether you're running a gym or whether you're working with clients, is to elicit out of them, be proactive about getting at those things that you can, should, and need to fix to be able to continue to have that long-term relationship. Because I like that I like that there's a recursive theme here, because going back to the idea of not spending all your time acquiring new customers, one of the fastest ways to get into that sort of hustle and grind, I got to keep getting new people, because you're churning people, you're losing people on the back all the time. One of the fastest ways to get stuck in that cycle is to ignore feedback, or just that even ignoring feedback sounds almost sort of willful and active. Just being oblivious to the needs of your customers, to things that might be going wrong. If you can just open those doors and start actively reaching out to figure out why you're losing people, if you're losing people, if you can slam that door of lost customers, or even just close it a good deal, all of a sudden you don't have to go out and hustle for new people. You don't have to go out and start like grinding for new work, because all of a sudden you don't have that leaky funnel where you're losing all these people off the bottom. You're actually going to retain a lot of those people, and that lowers your burden of acquiring new customers, because you're going to keep the bulk of them from month to month. So I guess for me, again, that for my model, I am super attuned to what I can do for my clients, because again, if we're talking about 5 or 6 a year, every time I lose one, that's a big chunk of my annual income out the door that I now have to go and
you got to fix
fight
that
and hustle to get. Yeah. So that's why that's a huge focus for me. And I think also if your business works on a one-off basis where, you haven't thought of, this would be a strategic recommendation I would make to somebody who is selling something and then their interaction with their customer is over, is you've invested. The hardest thing is to acquire that new customer in almost all businesses. So once you've got them, they trust you, they've paid for something from you, figuring out a way to serve them on a more long-term capacity can help just astronomically grow your business, because all of a sudden, if they buy from you once and all of a sudden you can get them to buy from you twice, you've doubled the size of, every client is now worth 2 times as much to you for the same cost to acquire them as you had before. So, not to turn this into a J. Abraham love fest, but have you heard of the 3 ways to grow a business?
Yeah, totally.
So, thinking about growing a business of any kind, there's really only 3 ways to do it. One is you acquire more total customers. So, if you get 100 customers a year and you can go to 120 customers a year, you've grown your business by 20%. You can also grow the average transaction. So if you have 100 customers, they all buy from you once a year and it's $100, and then you can get them to spend $120 instead. Once again, you got 100 customers, but instead of at $100 each purchase, it's $120. That also grows the business. And then the third is getting them to purchase more frequently. So again, if you can simultaneously get more customers, get them to pay more per transaction, and get them to generate more total transactions, your business grows astronomically. So thinking about what your strategy is in terms of how are you operating, are you purely acquiring customers and in that hustle to go out and get people mode? If so, think about, what are some other things I could do to either increase my value and charge more so that I'm getting more per transaction, or what are some things that I could do to my business to get people to come back and buy from me more often, so that way, again, for the same cost of acquiring a customer, you're now, I don't want to say sort of extracting more value from them, because that can come across as one-sided, but from your perspective, you're extracting more from them, but in order to do that, you're also giving more to them, right? So there's an even exchange of you've created a business that does more for the customer, so therefore they are happy to give you more of their money every time they come in the door. And if you can do that, your business will take off. And for me, it's very helpful to think about those three buckets because it makes it easy to identify. If you're putting all of your efforts in one place, you could shift, a couple hours of your time that's you're grinding for new customers and think about and put in place one of those other two options, and all of a sudden grow your business to a much bigger degree without, for the same effort, the same time, the same cost.
Yeah, I think that your point there about we're just going to maximize the value we've extracted from this client, right? Like, it's not like that most people have had a lot of bad experiences with a lot of businesses or service providers, right? So if they are working with someone who they trust, they are excited to potentially continue doing business with that person, right? Yeah. Where it's like, great, this person actually does what they're supposed to. They do it when they say they're going to do it. I don't have to chase them down. This is awesome. I will pay you whatever you want.
Right. It's the shut up and take my money.
Doing this. Yes.
That shut up and take my money meme. I was saying that it was the whole shut up and take my money meme. I think it was from Futurama or whatever, where it's the guy just throwing cash. So, if you're a business, that's the place you want to be, where you are doing so much good for your customers that they are throwing their money at you because this is probably the best litmus test for whether or not you're doing an ethical job of what you're selling. Is if you sell someone your product or service, then the next day or after they've had a chance to use it, you then take it away and give them their money back. If they are pissed, if they're like, God damn it, I want that back, keep my money, I want the thing that you sold to me. If that's the reaction, you're doing a good job. Continue to sell the hell out of all of that, because again, your customers love you so much that if you forced a refund on them, they would be mad. You're selling something that they value so much. They literally, by the definition of economics, value it more than the money that they paid you, because if you offered them the return, they say no.
Yeah, totally. That's a really good point. So if we think about maybe some specific application of a lot of the stuff that we've talked about, you were involved in the rebranding and relaunch of MobilityWOD as the Ready State, which is not just changing the name, but sort of cleaning up the offer on the product, restructuring the product, all that stuff. How did you apply all the stuff that we've talked about to that relaunch?
Over the course of many, many months. So it was a massive undertaking by an amazing team of people. Have to give credit to Kelly and Juliet Starrett as the two founders of that business. They did an amazing job, and I was honored to be a part of that team. And it really did feel like a team. So I have to give them credit for a great job leading that. It really started. I started in a very lucky situation because I had used the MobilityWOD daily videos for several years before we started talking about working together. So I kind of got to skip the line on a lot of the customer research. I didn't actually skip it, I did it, but I knew what my experience was as a customer for several years before becoming the copywriter for the business. So that gave me a huge leg up because I didn't have to do as much to mine the audience data and their feedback because I had used the product before. Not like I said, I still did that. I still went through, they had a bunch of survey data. So I went through all the surveys. I looked at the common pain points, the common language, talked with Kelly and Juliet about the vision for where they wanted, what was driving them to have that rebrand, and then found a way, found where all of the stuff that the audience was talking about lined up with all of the changes that they were making to the business in the new brand. And again, to Kelly and Juliet's credit, all the stuff that they were talking about and wanting to change and wanting to implement that was all in the survey data that I was going through. So for me, they had done a lot of that legwork up front in the product they were building because they had already taken in that feedback. So for me, I was really more looking for language, like what are the words that people are using to describe their problems, and when they're praising and giving positive feedback, what are the words they're using about the sort of the benefits or the solutions or the positive changes, so that I could start pulling those words and phrases to use in the copy for them. So that was sort of the research background information gathering component of the project. But then on top of that, thinking about how are we actually going to sell it, going through those activities on proof gathering, testimonial gathering, all those things. And we talked about the different types of social proof to be able to come up with the sales page for their sort of, I guess I would say their primary offer is now something called Virtual Mobility Coach, which is now a more personalized experience, whereas before you would get a video or two every day, everybody would get the same video. Now you can choose from various types of programming. If you're working out, you can say, I'm pre-workout deadlift and get a custom set of mobilizations for that versus, before, again, it was sort of a one size fits all. So thinking about what is this new product, it is a virtual mobility coach. How are we going to convince people that this is something that they want to buy? It becomes, it's a Kelly Starrett in your pocket. It is I would say the world's best mobility coach has built this program that lets you get customized, personalized programming that he has designed. So that became the theme for a lot of the marketing and sales that we did was, it's like having a Kelly Starrett in your pocket. And I used that line a number of times. And thinking about proof and credibility, all we had to do was go through the roster of people Kelly has worked with, and just highlight all of those amazing success stories that he has, to be able to say, if he can fix the mobility and mechanics for an Olympic gold medalist who's putting their body through the demands of a the highest level of competition, he can help you, if you're a little bit sore from sitting at your desk too much. So that was the time where it was not an issue of like intimidation, because you understand that you're not putting your body through the paces that someone who's a world champion or an Olympic athlete is. But if the person understands the human body enough to fix an Olympic athlete, then they can handle any set of problems that comes their way, basically. So that was the whole thrust and the direction that we took with that.
And I assume that the idea of turning it into more of a customizable prescription was based upon the actual feedback from people, as they're like, yeah, this is cool, and I like these videos, but like you said, I'm going into deadlift today, and I don't want to do just some random foam rolling and stretching. I want to prepare to deadlift. So we figured out, okay, how can we actually solve that problem for this individual?
Yes, yeah, that was one of the things that when we first announced the change, we talked about like what's staying the same, what's different. We talked about the personalization angle with pretty much that example is in the MWOD Pro days, you might be doing deadlifts in your programming and the mobilization would be for your big toe, which big toe is actually a hugely important joint when it comes to hip extension and lunge archetype, what Kelly would call the lunge archetype. Like that is, you need your big toe to get to a full 90 degrees. And if you can't bend that way, you're going to lose, if you snatch or whatever, you're going to lose a lot of that contact with the ground. But it's not as important if you're deadlifting. So people were saying they wanted to be able to go to the gym based on their programming, get the mobilizations that would be best for their particular day that day. And so that's, again, credit to Kelly and Juliet. They heard that, and then they built an amazing product amazing product to actually deliver that. And they really went all in on developing this platform. It was a ton of work that they should get all the credit in the world for putting together.
Totally. And it sounds like the sort of positioning that you settled on was like, okay, you have Kelly Starrett in your pocket, right? Someone that this world-class coach is going to tell you what to actually do. What were other options that you were thinking of like ways that you could try to position this that might resonate with people?
That's a good question. And I don't recall the things that we didn't run with that were like sort of on the table at one time. So that is a great question on your part. I'm sorry that I don't have an answer for that, because I could totally see how that would be an amazingly valuable lesson of like, here was the winner and here were the other ones that didn't win.
Yeah.
I wish I could do that. My brain does not have the recall for those specifics at this point. I'm sorry.
Maybe that one was just so good. You're just like, This is it. We nailed it right here.
Right. So what I will say is again, we were talking about headlines before and how if you have a sort of promise or benefit in the headline, you want to give some level of proof that whatever you're saying in the headline is true. I think the example I gave before is like lose 30 pounds in 30 days versus like this person lost 30 pounds in 30 days doing this somewhat specific or like vague and curiosity provoking thing. The second headline is much better. In the case of the Ready State, if you go to the site, I think it's the readystate.com/trial, and this is not a plug. It's just that's the headline I believe is on that page. It's something like mobility coach for Olympic gold medalists and pro athletes reveals how to resolve pain and improve athletic performance. So specifically leading with the proof, right? We're leading with the credibility that this is a mobility coach for Olympic gold medalists and pro athletes. Well, whatever we say next, because it's coming from that person, as long as it's in their domain of expertise, the reader is going to be much more inclined to believe the next piece, which is, resolve pain and improve athletic performance. That's much more believable than like, the new weird trick for improving athletic performance and resolving your pain, right? So the second one, the first one, the one that we actually went with, has that clarity of credibility in the beginning of the headline. And whenever you can, I think like on a tactical copywriting level, whenever you can introduce the proof in the headline first and then deliver the sort of benefit or the promise, that's the way to go. And it can take some trick, like it can take some wordsmithing to figure out the best way to do that. And even if you can't lead with the proof, make sure you get it in there. So that way, even if you lead with a benefit, it's backed up by some amount of proof at the end of the headline so that people can say, oh, I understand this is coming from a credible source. I can trust this promise. I can believe what they're saying. I'm going to keep reading versus this is bullshit. I don't believe it. I'm out.
Yeah. Especially in fitness, like we said before, where people are a little bit cagey or they're kind of like, yeah, right. I don't think so.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've probably dealt with this all the time where it's like the market is so saturated. People have heard it all before. Like, how do you stand out? You deal with this all the time, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. It can be particularly challenging because there is so much stuff out there that just doesn't live up to the hype on the sales page or whatever. So it's an area where people have often been burned multiple times by previous coaches or gyms or programs. So the proof becomes very, very important to kind of get over that hump.
Absolutely. So for all you fitness professionals listening, that book, How to Write a Good Advertisement by Victor Schwab, buying it just to go and flip through to the 17 different forms of proof. I think it's chapter 3, if I remember. But that alone is worth the cost of the book, because then you'll have a checklist where you can either ask yourself or ask your clients or, go through an exercise to document those 17 things to the extent that you have them. And then also, if there's a gap someplace, figure out how can you fill that gap. So I think one of the other things that we didn't talk about yet is a guarantee. So some type of risk reversal where you make a promise. If you don't fulfill that promise, here's how you know that you're not going to get burned. You're going to be made whole in some way based on this guarantee.
Yeah. Do you have an example of what that would look like?
Oh yeah. So I have another client that I work for sells basically like powdered superfood drink mixes. So instead of buying a $300 juicer and spending $1,000 a month on fresh produce or whatever it would cost, you can get powdered the drink mix with the 13, 14 different superfoods that you can just scoop into water and mix it up. So they have a guarantee where it's a 60-day money back guarantee where each bottle is a 30-day supply. So you can try an entire 30 days, and then you can take another 30 days to decide if you liked it enough to get your money back. And if at any point you don't love everything about the product, the way it makes you feel, how it tastes, how easy it is to mix, if you're not completely satisfied, you can send back the empty container and get a full refund. So like at that point, there's really nothing to lose. You can try the whole 30 days, then take 30 more days to decide. And if at any point during that time frame you decide it's not for you, send back the empty bottle and you get your cash back.
Yeah, totally. And that the idea there, is really just that, like you're talking about before, people have been often burned before by a product that didn't work quite as advertised or whatever. And, even if you don't expect most people to even take you up on a specific refund like that, it's not necessarily a trick. It's like, hey, listen, like we actually believe in this and we know that there's shady stuff in the market. So like, it's okay. It's on us if it doesn't go as you thought it was going to.
Right. And we were talking before about the sort of the ultimate ethical test of sales, where if you sell somebody, so let's say you sold somebody their thing and then you tried to sort of force them the refund and take back the product from them and they say, no, I still want it. This gives them that option, essentially. It puts that power into their hands, and that just takes away so many concerns and so many fears. Not just, yes, people have been burned in the past for sure, but also what works for one person may not necessarily work for another person. So just to be able to say we stand behind our product so much that, we respect you for taking this chance. We understand that it's a chance until we've gotten an opportunity to prove ourselves. So let us prove ourselves to you. Buy the product. And if it's not everything that we say, and if it's not what you want, then we will give you all your money back. And honestly, you can even go through, there's many other ways. That's just one example. There's examples where it's a more than money back guarantee. So I've seen people who are like, take my email course of my online course about email marketing. And if it doesn't do everything that we say, we'll refund your money and we'll buy you someone else's. So pick another email marketing course on the market. We'll buy that course for you too. So, you can get really creative with how you reverse that risk and make that person feel like they're making a smart decision. This is not going to come back to bite them in the ass. That's what you're trying to do with the guarantee, is make someone feel comfortable that they're making a smart decision and that it's not going to come back to haunt them if they take this chance right now. Worst case scenario, they'll be right back where they started, and it's like no harm, no foul.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a great example of we'll buy you someone else's. I feel like I should use that.
Yeah, seriously.
If you hate it, we'll buy you a month at another gym.
Yeah. I mean, you absolutely could, right? And that not only does that make the customer feel comfortable, it also shows confidence on your part. Like, yo, we are so good. We know that you're going to stick around. This is how confident we are in what we do. Is we are willing to take that big of a risk on our side because we believe in what we do so much. It's a signal in both directions.
Yeah, it's incredible. So Brian, this has been a world-class education in copywriting. As discussed, you don't have an email list. You don't really post on social media. you only work with a few clients. Is there anything that you would like the listeners to do to potentially reach out to you, or specific information that they should look up if they have enjoyed the last hour or so of discussion?
First thing is that book, How to Write a Good Advertisement by Victor Schwab. I'm sure you can drop a link in the show notes. Highly recommend that. It has stood the test of time in the best way possible. Like that Schlitz beer example we were talking about. I don't even know that they're around anymore, but that story has in many ways outlasted the company. So this book is in the same way. The examples may be from a long time ago, but the lessons are timeless. So that would be one recommendation. The other is just my email. It's brian@acceleratedconversions.com. You can put a link to that in the show notes too, because it might be tough to spell, but it's Brian with an I. And yeah, I like to nerd out about this stuff. So if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have thoughts, any suggestions, feel free to reach out. And even though I do work with a small number of clients each year, I am taking on new clients from time to time. So, if it seems like a copywriter would fit your business and the level of scale that you're at, I would love to talk about working together. But, even if it's just to chat about marketing and to nerd out about sales and persuasion, I love that too. So this has been great. I appreciate it, Todd.
Thanks for listening. If you like the show, the best thing to do would be to send it to one of your friends who also likes podcasts. If you want more, I have an email list where I send out a weekly update with all the podcasts I've recorded and articles that I've written. I also include my favorite things that I've been reading or listening to as well. You can sign up for that at www.toddneve.com. That's I before E, or you can open up the show notes in your podcast player and click the link in there.